Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr,
business consultant.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr Business Consulting.
Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs and business owners maximize their potential and build rock-solid businesses. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Bob Proctor said, "It doesn't matter where you are nowhere compared to where you can go." Well, on today's episode, we're going to talk about learning and growth, how growth happens, why it can be difficult to start something new and stick with it, gaining momentum, and more. Our guest is the CEO and co-founder of Disruption Advisors, a tech-enabled talent development company which was recognized in 2020 as an Inc. 5000 fastest growing company. She's a Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and Amazon best-selling author, keynote speaker, executive coach, consultant, a LinkedIn top voice, host of the popular podcast Disrupt Yourself, and was named one of the top 10 management thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50. She's a frequent lecturer at Harvard Business School's Corporate Learning and contributor to the Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan Management Review. Please welcome the woman who is helping us climb the S-curve of learning and growth in our personal and professional lives, Whitney Johnson. Whitney, it is great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Jay, thank you for inviting me. And I have to say, that was a really splendid introduction. So thank you for that.
It is my pleasure. And the reality is, Whitney, and to all of our listeners, that barely scratches the surface. And I'm so excited to dive into this conversation with you because there's so many great areas that I know we can cover that are going to be insightful and meaningful to all of our listeners. So let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point for us would be for you, Whitney, to share with us what your favorite trait is about yourself.
Oh, wow. Way to give me a softball question to start off with. I love that so much. Favorite trait about myself. I love about myself that I continually focus on being better and doing good in the world. I just always am trying to move forward and be a good person. I think that's my favorite trait about myself. I love that matters so deeply to me.
So let's pull on that thread for just a moment. So being better and doing good in the world. I love the way that sounds. So as you say that, and as you think about that trait within yourself, what does being better mean to you, and how does that look to you?
In my mind's eye, it looks like I look at myself and who I am today and how I show up in the world and what I accomplish and how I treat people. And then I ask myself, am I treating people better? Am I more disciplined? Am I more focused? Am I doing more good in the world today than I was yesterday? And can I see over the course of time that the trajectory is upward? And if I can see that, then I can see progress. Then I feel like I am getting better and I am doing good in the world. So I'm making sure that what I talk about, what I care about, I am doing exactly what I'm talking about, that there's, I'm in sync. What I'm doing is in sync with what I'm saying.
Beautiful. So congruency.
Yes, well said. Thank you.
I love that. Could you give us an example, a relevant example today of an area that you are working to get better at, that you are measuring as well?
Yeah. So one area that I'm really working on and have been working very diligently on over the past few years is when I do speaking, or I mean, a podcast interview, but speaking generally, delivering keynotes, is how do I, let me back up. So a couple of years ago, I had someone say to me, I have a podcast as well. And someone said to me, I think you could use some training when you speak so that you could, sort of vocal training. And I thought, okay, never had that feedback before, but I'm going to listen to it and see if I can do something different and better. And so I hired a voice coach who has been working with me not only on articulation and breathing, but also how can I make sure I'm in my body and I'm breathing and I'm relaxed. And so that will inform not only what I do when I'm being interviewed, when I'm interviewing, when I'm on stage. And so that is something that I'm monitoring very closely now, is that whenever I deliver a keynote or any sort of thing, am I in my body? How is my articulation? Am I increasingly comfortable? Am I increasingly showing up as who I think of myself to be, enjoying it, finding joy in the work, finding myself in this playful place. And so that's something that I've been working on very diligently for the past couple of years, and I'm making progress, and I am nowhere near where I want to be. But to your question, that is something that I'm in the throes of working on.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. And, you brought up a very important point during that story, which is around feedback, and you received some feedback from a guest. And I want to talk more about feedback a bit further into the conversation, because I think that's an important area for all of us as we look at our own growth and development, whether it's in the corporate world, whether it's personally as well. And not only how we ask for feedback, but also what do we do with the feedback itself. So I'm making a note to myself. I do want to make sure that we touch on that topic. But before we get there, I wanted to wind the clock back a bit. I've done a fair amount of research on you. I've consumed quite a bit of your content, and obviously your latest book. And it's always interesting to me that, we can provide a curated look at who we are. We can obviously make sure that all the content that we put out looks good and sounds good, which in your case, you've done some phenomenal work, and I really have enjoyed researching you. I'd be curious, if we went back in time a bit, could you tell us a bit about your backstory and really where your story begins? And if you could share part of that backstory with us, and what were maybe a few early experiences that you had that shaped the person that you've become.
That is a very big question, Jay. So why don't I start? And if I go off piste, if you will, then you can pull me back in.
I will.
Well, just quick thumbnail of my career. I majored in music in college. I played piano, but realized that when I graduated from college that I didn't actually want to be a musician for a living. It's something that I was good at when I was younger. I think it was really important to my parents that I pursue this. But when I graduated, I thought, this isn't really what I want to do. So I went to New York. I was now married, and we needed to put food on the table. And so I got a job as a secretary because I wasn't really qualified to do anything else. I had studied music. Not really. I had never set foot in a business course. I didn't have much confidence. And so started as a secretary. But as I went to this job, I'm working on Wall Street, working as a secretary to a retail stockbroker. I started looking around me at all these stockbrokers, and I thought, this is really exciting. And they're saying things like, throw down your pom-poms and get in the game. And I'd been a cheerleader in high school, so I was a little offended, but then I thought, oh, I need to throw down my pom-poms. I need to get in the game. And so I started taking business courses at night, accounting, finance, economics, and had a boss who believed in me, which allowed me to move from being a secretary to an investment banker. I did that for a few years. Then my boss got fired. They probably would have fired me too, but I was pregnant with our first child. And so they disrupted me into equity research, for which I'm very grateful, because it was a career maker. I was very good at stock picking, at seeing momentum for stocks. Is it going up? Is it going down, et cetera? And I did that for close to a decade. And then had gotten to a point where I thought, okay, I've pretty much learned what I can learn here. I need to disrupt myself. I went to my boss and said, hey, I want to do something new. They said, we like you right where you are. I said, okay, I've now read Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma. I know what disruption is. And so I left Wall Street to become an entrepreneur. And that really began this phase of life that I'm in now, which is I worked with Clayton Christensen actually for about 5 years, investing alongside him in disruption. But then I had this big insight, this big aha, that the theory of disruption wasn't just about products and services, it was about people. And I wrote an article called Disrupt Yourself in Harvard Business Review. This is back in 2011, 2012. And that was the beginning, or that was the real beginning of what I do now, where I had this recognition of, okay, I'm doing stocks, but I'm more interested in the momentum of people. I'm talking about the theory of disruption, applying it to stocks, but I'm actually more interested in disruption of people. I'm now using the S curve that's popularized by Everett Rogers to figure out how quickly an innovation is going to be adopted. And I realized, no, I'm more interested in thinking about how does the S curve apply to people. And so that has really blossomed into what I now consider to be my life's work, of how do I help people grow? How do I help people grow in order to grow their people, in order to grow their organizations? Which brings us back to that very first question that you asked me, which is I care deeply about growing for myself. And I, by extension, I want to find ways to help other people grow. I think I veered off, but you can bring me back on track. That was a quick thumbnail sketch of my story.
And you did such a great job of articulating that, which I greatly appreciate. There was a lot of information obviously packed into what you shared as well. There's something that you said that just immediately piqued my curiosity, and it was around belief. And you made the comment that you didn't believe in yourself early on. And I'm curious from your perspective, as you look back at the accomplishments that you've made, all the different areas that you've been exploring and what you've been able to create for yourself, where did the switch happen? If there was a particular point in time where you went from not believing to believing, how did that change occur? And was there a process behind that you had to work through? And if so, please share as much information as you can around that.
Yeah, Jay, I love that question. It's interesting because I think that have you studied the Enneagram at all?
Yes.
Okay, I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. I'm sure that probably doesn't surprise you at all when I'm like, I want to make the world a better place. Ones, for those of you who are not familiar with the Enneagram, it's the reformer. So I think there was an element all along in my life where I really wanted to improve myself. And so there was a belief that I'm going to get better. And so that has very much driven me. And I suppose there's definitely been an element of, am I good enough? Right. Because that can be a very strong motivating force of like needing to prove oneself. And so I think that has been for a lot of my life, a big motivator and instigator of me and drive and achievement. It's interesting though, because you quoted Bob Proctor at the very beginning of our conversation. I don't know if you did that on purpose. And
A little bit.
A little bit. Okay.
Although I do love Bob Proctor's work.
Okay. I was like, on purpose or coincidence or a little bit of both. So just FYI, backstory for everyone. I came across Bob Proctor about 5 or 6 years ago, and I was speaking at a junior achievement event, and we were both on a panel. And afterwards, after the panel was over, he pulled me aside and he basically said, Whitney, you could be doing more than you're doing. And as you can tell, I'm getting a little bit teared up because he passed away early this year. And I was so grateful for that because he was seeing something in myself that I wasn't seeing. And one of the things he would talk about is you don't need to believe it, but you need to believe that you can believe it. It needs to be something that you believe can be true. And that really helped me. I would say if I think about trajectory, I was kind of going over one, up one, and I was absolutely making progress. But those conversations with him and that belief that he had in me, and also the tools that he had to program our psyche. I remember listening to some of his work over and over and over and over again, reprogramming my brain of what I believed was possible. And I think that point in time of when I connected with him, there was a big shift that took place. And so if you think about on the graph paper of existence, we went from over one, up one, and maybe it was faster than that. But I really look at the last few years, that has made a big difference. So that combination of him and then one other person who is now my business partner, her name is Amy Humble. She's the co-founder and president of Disruption Advisors, and her belief as well. And she was formerly the chief of staff of Jim Collins. So she knows talent, and her believing like we could build something big. And so the combination of those two individuals and influences in my life, and then my willing to do the work, I would say took that really solid foundation that I'd had and just put it on overdrive.
Wow. I love that. I truly do. It's amazing how the right people or the right person sometimes with the right message at exactly the right time can have such a transformative effect on our psyche, on our lives, on our beliefs. And you mentioned the sentence or the words, "Am I good enough?" I will tell you, and I share on this podcast with our guests as well as with our audience a lot around the journey that we as human beings go through. And I'm doing a lot more exploring of my youth. And that particular question that you ask yourself, or that you asked, "Am I good enough?" That is one that keeps coming up as I do my own deep work. And it's so interesting how we get to certain stages in life where we begin to ask those more deep and meaningful questions. But I think it's an important place to be. It's an important question to explore, especially if there are challenges around belief, around self-esteem, and other things that may be holding us back from being able to reach our true potential. So I thank you for addressing that.
And what I think is interesting, Jay, is that oftentimes we don't even know that that's a question that we're asking ourselves. It's there, but we don't realize it. It's just so much a part of our psyche and our script that we don't realize that's one of our operating questions. I remember a couple of months ago, I was having a conversation with Jason Pfeiffer, who is the CEO of Entrepreneur Magazine. And he said, "What's your operating question?" And he said, "Mine's, how can I find more joy today?" or something like that. And I realized, oh, do you know what mine is? It's, how do I survive today? Like, that is not really the question that you want to have to go achieve your possibilities. How am I going to survive? So it goes back to that thing of like, am I good enough? How am I going to survive? And how do you flip that script? As you can tell, I'm a work in progress of how am I going to find more joy today? And what do I believe or want to believe that I can believe is true? But yeah, so that's, as you said, we are all growing, and that, I guess, is the purpose of your podcast, is to help your audience find tools to grow and develop.
That's exactly right. And as a sidebar comment, I did listen to that particular episode that you're referring to. And by the way, he's coming up as a guest on this show as well. But when he asked you that question and you responded, I had to stop the podcast for a moment, because first I was actually I was just floored that was the chosen response to his question. And it was a very telling response. And I really appreciated the back and forth and the dialogue that happened from that point forward. So it was a very interesting one. And I'm just going to mention to our audience right now, and I had said at the beginning, as we were talking about the intro, that you do have an amazing podcast, which we're going to link to. And I'd like to talk a bit about that as we dig into the conversation as well. But such a great podcast, great guests, which is amazing in and of itself. But the truth is, what is most meaningful is your ability to ask the deep questions, ask the relevant questions that pull out such great wisdom and insights. And that is not something that just happens overnight. So it goes back to, am I good enough? You're better than good enough. So
Well,
keep
now I know, Jay, why you came out swinging with this interview, because you knew you're like, let's give a little bit of turnabout as fair play, right?
had to. So you've done well so far. So let's keep the conversation going.
Okay.
So I want to tug on belief just one more moment, because I am curious to find out from you, what is something that you believed about yourself early in life
Mm.
that you discovered later wasn't true?
Hmm. All right. I'm just going to go with what came to my brain. I thought I was ugly,
Really?
and I'm not ugly. I'm not beautiful, but I'm certainly not ugly. And I look at pictures of myself as a kid. I'm like, how could I have believed that? So I think we believe a lot of things about ourselves that just are not true. Like like really not true.
So let me ask you, was that purely on the physicality side, or was there more to
I
that
think it,
word that you gave more meaning to?
well, that's actually a really, really good question. I love that you probe there, because if I go back and I reflect, it's interesting that oftentimes how we feel about what we look like is a reflection of how we're feeling about ourselves internally. And I've noticed that as I've gotten older, is because, well, two things I would say. I will sometimes look at pictures of myself, 5 years, 10 years, and I think, wow, I look better now than I looked when I was 20. And you think, well, empirically that's probably not true. I mean, you probably look at your best when you're 20 or 25, but then I reflect and I think, but I'm happier now than I was when I was 20. And so that is what is coming through in my face, in my visage, in my demeanor, in my affect. The other thing that I would say is that I remember hearing someone mention a few years ago. I was at something called Time Out for Women, and it's a conference, a faith-based conference. And a woman said something that has really stayed with me. She said, "You can't, you can't, you can't feel the spirit." But I use this more broadly. You can't feel good about yourself. You can't feel good about the people that you're talking to and not feel beautiful or handsome. I think we don't usually refer to men as beautiful. And that has really stayed with me. And I've thought about that a lot. And I've mentioned that to lots of women in particular, is that when you are feeling good about yourself, when you're feeling connected to the people that you're talking to, when you're feeling the sense of aspiration and possibility, you don't feel ugly. It's actually impossible to feel that way. So so those are my thoughts on that at this point. I haven't thought about this much recently, but um yeah, if you feel good about yourself and you look at pictures of yourself, usually whether or not you think you look good is a reflection of how you were feeling about yourself at that point in time.
So, so good and so well stated. I love that. That's one I'm going to dig into a bit deeper on my own, but I really appreciate you sharing that. And it reminds me, I had a conversation with a business group today, and I was briefly talking about how we express love in both our personal and professional lives. And when you think about it, it really has so much to do with connection, listening, being present, being where your feet are, and paying attention. And when we can give that, when we can truly express ourselves through the right type of connections, when we are more interested in what the other person has to say, when we're more interested in the other person than trying to be interesting, those situations create, I look at it as love, as giving and receiving love. And it's fulfilling. it creates a level of joy and happiness, and which ultimately we feel better.
Yeah.
We just feel better.
Mhm.
And so I thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I would love it if we could explore for a couple of minutes your latest book, which is called Smart Growth: How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company. And in this book, and for all of you that are watching and listening right now, we're going to link to be able to purchase a copy of this latest book, which I would definitely encourage everyone to go out and buy a copy. We're gonna talk about some of the areas of this book, but clearly there is absolutely no way that we could cover this book in the detail that we would like to. So, but the book is, you provide a framework and really a blueprint for mastering learning and growth. And the book is full of just exceptional stories and detailed research and takeaways and actionable insights. And what I really appreciate about your writing style and the way that you put this book together is not only does it provide the information that is important for us to know, but then you take it a step further and you really do provide us those action steps.
Mm.
And I almost feel like I almost look to you as almost an accountability partner. So here are the areas to work on. Here are the takeaways. Here are the steps to get there. And then now it's a matter of getting it done, doing the work, which is one of the things that you said earlier, that you were willing to do the work. And that's what you would expect from us as a reader. If it's important enough, we will do the work.
Mhm.
So, with all of that said, I'd love to find out from you, first and foremost, what was the catalyst for writing the book, and why did you feel that now was an important time for you to bring this book to life?
Mm. So the book is called Smart Growth, and the catalyst for writing it was I had written two books prior to this, if you think of it as a trilogy. So a book called Disrupt Yourself, which we alluded to earlier, which is this idea of if you want to make progress, you need to disrupt who you are, step back from who you are to slingshot into who you want to be. And there's a 7-point framework of how to do that. And the S curve itself was in that book, but it was a backup singer. It was a supporting actor. And then I wrote a second book in this trilogy called Build an A Team, which was taking this framework of personal disruption and applying it to a team. So as a manager, how do you use this work to configure a team? Again, S curve, part of the book, but very much a supporting actor. I then had this experience where I was marketing the book Build an A Team, and Dan Pink was generous enough to have me come on his Pink cast, and we were trying to figure out the hook for that conversation. It was 90 seconds, and I kept saying, well, why don't we do this or that or the other thing? And finally he said, why don't we talk about the S curve? I'm like, huh, that is a supporting actor. And he just called the supporting actor out to get the Academy Award for the leading actor. There must be something here. And so I decided that it was really important to write a book about the S curve itself, and build a more robust case for why I think it is a model for what learning and growth looks like. And we could talk in a minute about the backstory for that. But to use this as a model for people to say, okay, I want a map. I want to grow. Help me know how to do this. And the S curve of learning gives you a very simple visual model of what growth looks like. Now, one could say, if one wanted to, I wrote this book because we're coming out of the pandemic and people, a period of a pandemic, severe trauma, post-traumatic growth, et cetera, et cetera. I could say all that, but it would not be true. It would be just that I got lucky, that this book happened to come out at the time when we were coming out of the pandemic and people do want to know how to grow. It's always relevant, but it is especially relevant now where we talk about the great resignation, but I in fact say that it is the great aspiration, and the S curve of learning gives you a map to aspire, to grow. And once you know how to grow, the more you can grow.
Mm. Such a great way of explaining that. And it also goes to the power of language. I
Mm.
love how you look at this as a time of aspiration and being able to look at this through the right lens, the lens of growth and opportunity. So I'm curious about the writing process itself and how this particular book differed from the writing process of your previous books, if there
Mm.
were any differences. And this question goes to those of us in the audience who are either current authors or aspiring authors. So share with us a bit about the experience of writing it.
Yeah, so this was actually my fourth book, and I think everybody's different, but this is my journey. So my first book was titled Dare, Dream, Do. Remarkable Things Happen When You Dare to Dream. And I remember reading somewhere once that someone said, how's that for attribution? That oftentimes your very first book is in many ways autobiographical, that you're trying to figure something out for yourself. And so Dare, Dream, Do, I had done a lot of blogging up to that point. The impetus for that book was I had, worked on Wall Street. I'd been very successful. I was now having conversations with lots of women and asking them, what's your dream? And they were saying, I don't have a dream. I'm like, how can you not have a dream? Like, you have to have a dream. And so this book was really written to women generally. But as you can imagine, in writing this book, there was this element of I felt like I had something to say, but I also wanted to figure out and find my voice. And so that was that book. And there were lots of interviews from other people that were in the book. And so that first book, I had never written a book before. I would say that I was very back and forth with my editor. So anybody who thinks you don't have an editor, like, no, 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 no. You write a book. It's a collaborative process of here's what I think I want to say. Is this what you want to say, et cetera. And so very, 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 very hands-on. Second book, Disrupt Yourself. I had a better sense of the process itself. And so I had an editor work with me again, but this time I had more people read it and really make sure I got the jargon out of it and do things like just make sure it hung together in a way that was really meaningful. And that particular book, my husband, he's a biologist, and you'll see sort of some threads of biology and Galapagos Islands, et cetera. That's because he was influencing me and my thinking in writing that particular book. With Build an A Team, with every book, it's gotten a little bit so it's more of a team working on the book. So for example, Build an A Team, I had a couple people that I was working with and helping me do the research, even though I was doing a lot of the interviewing. You found a lot of my podcast interviews making their way into the book Build an A Team. And then this most recent book, Smart Growth, you'll find almost all of my stories are based on stories that I found through the course of the podcast. So all of these primary interviews that I did. And I had two people that were working with me very closely in writing and drafting the book. And then I think the one thing that I would say with this book, more than even the other ones, is that I really wanted this book, Smart Growth, to sing. I wanted it to feel musical, as I'm a musician by training. And I remember getting to about 70% or 80% of the way there and feeling like it's not singing yet. It's just not there. So I put it in the hands of one of my friends who is a YA author who is like a New York Times bestselling young adult author fiction. And I had her take a look at it and she eviscerated it. And that's exactly what it needed. But I love that I've had the confidence to let someone look at it and just literally rip it apart and just say, this doesn't make sense. You're not clear enough. Like you're being self-indulgent. You don't have enough stories about like the struggle that you're in. You're making it sound too chirpy. Like all these things that allowed me to go back, with my editor and rewrite it and get it to the point where I can now say that this is, to me, by far the best book that I have written. And that makes me really proud because oftentimes people write their best book and everything's downhill from there. And again, back to this idea of I want to keep getting better. I want that when I write the next book, that the next book is even better than this book. So that gives you a little bit of color around the writing process. You
Yeah,
can ask more questions though, because I'm sure you probably have some questions.
I do, but I believe that probably provides us enough information around the process. Certainly, we could go deeper, but I do want to follow up with this one question. So after this YA author had provided you the feedback that
Yeah.
you needed, and that
Mhm.
goes back to feedback that we had spoken about before. Once you completed the book, did the book sing?
For me, yes.
Awesome.
It does.
Good.
I feel like it's musical. I feel like it, if you think about, I talk a lot about waves, you think about a piece of music where there's a crescendo. And I feel like my perception is if you read this book, you will get to the end and you will feel like there was a crescendo. And then the epilogue is the coda. Like it just keeps building and building. And true to the S curve, it gets better, the book itself gets better the further along you go. So yeah, I do feel like I did it.
Excellent. Beautiful, beautiful description. So I'll just share with you because we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but I did know that you were a music major and that you were a piano player. I
Mhm.
also studied music in college. That was the major that I
Nice.
was going for. We're both well, you live in Virginia now. That's not
Uh-huh.
where you were from. Am from Virginia. I don't live there currently, but so I appreciate as you are talking about the way the book sings. That resonates with me. So thank you for
So
that.
what did you study? What music did you study?
So I'm primarily a drummer. So
Oh,
I studied really music theory,
yep.
percussion, drums. I played violin. I played piano, and really drums and percussion are my primary instruments.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
the others I can play reasonably well, but certainly nowhere near your caliber.
That's so interesting that you play multiple instruments, and it's interesting if you go back. I just had David Epstein on the podcast who wrote Range, and the research shows is that people who play multiple instruments are more likely to be better musicians. I only play one instrument, which may be why I decided I didn't want to pursue music, but I love that you play multiple instruments. That's fantastic.
Enjoyed it. It's a great challenge for sure. So let's talk about the S curve of learning. And as I was going through your book and doing my own research, you do a great job of graphically displaying the S curve of learning. I would love it if you could take us through that. Let's talk about the 3 points along the S curve itself, as well as the 6 stages
Mm.
of growth. But let's start with the 3 points. Give us a description of the S curve and walk our audience. I've heard you do this and you do it so well, but walk our audience through a visual so we can
Sure.
understand this more visually
Mhm.
and tactily.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So quick background. The S curve, some of you are going to be familiar with it. It was popularized by Everett Rogers, a sociologist, and he used it to understand how groups change over time. We then applied it at the Disruptive Innovation Fund that I co-founded with Clay Christensen to help us understand how quickly an innovation would be adopted. The aha that I had, the insight, was that you could use the S curve to also understand how individuals change, how we learn and grow. And one of the greatest predictors of upside, or excuse me, longevity in an organization is growth upside. So you can then use the S curve to help deliver that upside for people. So what does it look like visually? What I'd like you all to do is in your mind is to take your finger and trace a flat line from the left to the right. And then I want you to take your finger and do like a diagonal line still from left to right. So that's the steep, sleek back of the S. That's the second part. So the first part, that flat line is the launch point. Then the steep, sleek back is the sweet spot. And then the top is from left to right, again, flat is mastery. So what's happening in your brain when you start something new is it's running a predictive model and it's trying to figure out what will it take to get from the bottom of this S to the top of this S. And at the bottom of that curve, that flat part, the launch point, most of your predictions are inaccurate. And so dopamine, the chemical messenger of delight, it drops. It's not that growth isn't happening here. In fact, it is, but because it's not yet apparent, it feels slow. So you feel overwhelmed, discouraged, impatient. which is why, as you talked about at the introduction, it is very hard to start something new because it's thrilling, but there's a lot that's very challenging and it feels like a slog. So that's the experience that you have at the launch point, that first stage of the curve. But then you hit this tipping point, but Malcolm Gladwell popularized, and you move in this steep, sleek back of the curve. And this is the sweet spot. And this is the place where your predictions are increasingly accurate. And so the dopamine spikes, you have emotional upside surprises, you feel exhilarated. Growth's not only fast, it feels fast. So it's very easy to keep going. That's the sweet spot. That's the middle part of the curve. Then you reach mastery. Well, what happens in mastery? Your predictions are now accurate. The model works. There's a little bit of dopamine, but not a lot. So growth is in fact slow. So you now have slow at the launch point, fast in the sweet spot, slow in mastery, a very simple model of what growth looks like. And when you understand that, what it does is it demystifies this process of personal growth. It helps you understand, oh, this is why it's hard to start something new. Oh, this is why it's easy to keep going once I start. And oh, this is why I can be really good at something and feel like I can no longer keep doing it because my brain needs more dopamine. So it's time for me to keep climbing or find a new S curve to jump to. And so you can then use it not only for personal growth, but for you who are entrepreneurs, it allows you to have this conversation around talent development. Every single person on your team is on an S curve. And when you understand where they are, you'll know, okay, they're at the launch point. They're overwhelmed. They need support. They're in the sweet spot. They're exhilarated, but they need me to say thank you and also help them focus because I might be giving them too much to do. And in mastery, oh, it's not that they don't like working here. They don't like working for me. It's just that they need a new challenge. So how am I going to make sure I give them a new challenge? This allows you as an entrepreneur to develop your talent. It helps with retention because you understand that growth is our default setting. And it also can help you as you're thinking about optimizing your team for growth. If you have most of your people in the sweet spot, a small group of people, no more than 20% at the launch point, no more than 20% in mastery, then you've now optimized your team for growth and innovation as well. So you can use it for personal growth, for talent development, for retention, but also optimizing your team and your organization for growth. That is what the S curve of learning helps you do.
So good. So when you had that aha moment, when you realized that the S curve could be used in these particular cases, I can sense, as I had been going through your book, I can just sense how huge that must have been for you when you reached that moment where you saw that this goes way beyond what it had been used for. There's so many other applications for it. I would love it if you could share with our audience maybe a brief example from your own personal life where you have been at each of those 3 points. So the launch point is an example.
Yeah.
Give us just a personal example, and then let's go to the sweet spot and then to mastery.
Yeah. And something just came up for me. I want to just say to people, because it sounds like there might be a lot of your listeners who do have a book or something that they want to write. And I remember at one point, a person on our team made the comment about how I made these vast intuitive leaps, and then I figured out the research behind it. And I had this idea around the S curve of learning back in 2011, 2012. Part of the reason I wrote this book now in 2022 was that I knew intuitively it was accurate, and I was qualitatively getting this data that it was accurate, but I needed to do the research. I needed to look at biology. I needed to look at neuroscience to make sure that what I believed was true was in fact true. So I want to just say that to your audiences. If you have these instincts of, I think this is correct, it's okay to go with it, but then over time, find the research and the qualitative and quantitative data to back it up. So for some reason, someone in your audience needed to hear that because that just came into my head. Okay.
Wonderful.
So personal examples. I'll just talk about right now in my life. So as you might have surmised, is your life and your career is actually a portfolio of S curves. You can be on multiple S curves at any given time. So one of the places that I feel like I'm on the launch point is we have this tool. It's the S-curve insight tool that it's in development. It's more than in development. I mean, there are people that are using it and paying for it, but still feel very much on the launch point of rolling that out into the world. We have a certification process that is on the launch point. Learning how to be a leader, a CEO that can scale a business, I'm on the launch point. So I have a number of launch points right now. Where I'm in the sweet spot, I would say, you called it out that, you were kind enough. I feel like I'm in the sweet spot as an interviewer. I really enjoy it. I'm good at it. I feel like I could definitely get better, but I would definitely say that I'm in the sweet spot. And there are days where I've set back. Yesterday I did an interview. I was like, that was kind of clunky, but for the most part, I feel like I'm in the sweet spot from an interviewing standpoint. Where am I in mastery? That's interesting, because if you go back to what I said earlier, well, okay, this is, I feel like I can always get better, but I do have an answer for that, because sometimes with mastery, it doesn't mean that you're the world's foremost expert. It can just be that you did what you came to do. So you wrote the book that you meant to write, or you did what you meant to do with this particular business or with this particular client, or you learned 5 songs on the ukulele and that's all you wanted to learn. Or like right now, I'm learning a few words on, Duolingo for Korean because I'm obsessed with Korean dramas. What did you set out to do? And once you get to that point, then it's time to move on. So you could argue that I graduated from college in music. And was I a master? No. But had I done what I felt like I needed to do at that point in time? Yes. And so I moved from that S curve and I jumped to a Wall Street S curve. So from a mastery perspective, as you're thinking about it, you're thinking about your business, you're thinking about people on your team. It's not necessarily an expert. It's just, did you accomplish what you set out to accomplish? And do you feel like there's more for you to do on this planet and you can't do it if you stay where you are? Those are going to be those indicators that you've hit mastery and it's time for you to do something new.
A great explanation. Do you feel at this point that you could look at any example from your life where you currently are in a particular area and very quickly identify where you are on the S curve? Do you have to think about it, or does it just immediately? I know this is where I am.
I immediately know, and
okay.
And this is what I love about it, because everybody immediately knows. Like, that's the thing, that the beauty of it is that it can go really deep. Like, there's a whole book on it, but it's also very simple. So it becomes this language of, you can have a conversation with a 10-year-old and explain this to them. And they're like, but mom, I don't want to play this instrument anymore. I'm really bad at it. Or why did I try? And you're like, okay, it's true that you might end up being bad at this, but right now we don't have enough data to know that you're bad at it. All we know right now is you are on the launch point and it is awkward and uncomfortable and gangly. You just need to spend a little bit more time, and then we'll get the data and decide if it makes sense for you to continue. But it allows you very quickly to map where you are and the emotional experience that you're having. And once you know that, you're like, okay, so this is what I need to do now. Great. I'm in mastery. I need to do something new. I'm in a sweet spot. I need to make sure I focus and don't get distracted. And I'm at the launch point. I just need a little bit of encouragement and guidance. Boom.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So you have 2 children that are in their 20s.
Yes.
Do you talk about the S curve with them? Are they well informed about the S curve? Do you use that as a mapping tool and as a learning tool in the things that they're experiencing in their own lives, personally and professionally?
When they let me.
When they let you. Okay, I love that.
As every parent will attest to, no parent is a prophet in their own land. I mean, they have definitely imbibed it and are aware of it. But as we all know, I remember a few years ago, someone said to me, wow, your parents must think your children must think you're really awesome. I'm like, No, they just think I'm their mom, and they think they see my good things and they see, my not so good things. The thing I will say, to be fair to children, is that I would say that no person on the planet is more invested in your success. They, of course, they see your underbelly, but they also see your potential. And more than even, I would say, your partner or your spouse, they want you to win. They really do want you to win as their parent.
Absolutely. So let's take us through very briefly, the 6 stages of growth that we encounter along the S curve. And if you're able to just give us maybe a brief snapshot of each of those.
Yep, I'm happy to do it. All right, so we've got launch point that I talked about. That's the flat part of the launch point of the curve. There are 2 phases there. There's the explorer phase where here I am. I either chose to be here or I landed here. Now, what do I want to do? Do I want to stay here? So, in this exploratory phase where you ask some questions and say, do I want to stay here or do I want to immediately go to a new curve? Then if you want to stay, then you move to collector phase and you're still on the launch point. That's where you're collecting data of not qualitative data, quantitative data. I want to be on this curve, but can this ecosystem support me being on this curve? I want to be here, but are the conditions such that I can actually be successful, that I can get the resources that I need? And in fact, do I still want to be here? Am I building momentum? That's the collector phase. Well, if you continue to hit go, then you're going to hit that tipping point of moving into the sweet spot. Sweet spot has 2 phases. There's the accelerator phase, which is exactly how it sounds. You're starting to get very good at something. You're starting to be able to play those songs on the ukulele. You still have to be deliberate about it because the transformation isn't complete, but you're going fast and it feels exhilarating. Then you go into metamorph, and that's the upper part of that sweet spot. And this is the place where you could derail very easily because you're like, I'm really good at this. And if you don't keep your focus, you might do something new. And then that identity transformation, that transformation itself doesn't get complete. But in fact, it can complete the metamorph. It's like a metamorphosis of a butterfly. You go from you're no longer this thing that you do. It becomes who you are, which tips you into the mastery phase, which has anchor. It's now anchored in you. It is yours. It can't be pulled out. The identity transformation is complete. This is where you want to pause for a moment. You are at the top of the curve. You want to celebrate. And then, because it is a transitory phase, you go into mountaineer. And this is the place where you keep climbing. You jump to a new curve. You prepare to move to the launch point of a new curve. But that becomes the foundation of your next launch point. So you've got explorer, collector, accelerator, metamorph, anchor, mountaineer. And if you want to be a peak performer, you are good at all phases of the curve. It's not just about being in the sweet spot in perpetuity. A peak performer is a person who can navigate a launch point, move through the sweet spot, get to the peak, the mastery phase, and then has the willingness and the ability to move to a new curve. It's that completing of that growth cycle that makes us as human beings peak performers.
Wow. This is just the visual that you've given, the way that you explain each of the stages, how we can take this information and look at where we currently are, understand what our path forward looks like, and it just opens up a world of opportunity for each and every one of us. And again, for all of you watching and listening right now, we are going to link to where you can purchase a copy of the book. Also, the S-curve tool, the insight tool that you mentioned, is where can we go to be able to link to that tool?
Yeah, so the best way right now is just to go onto the website. So it's thedisruptionadvisors.com, and there are links there that you can go to for that.
Okay, perfect. We will link to that as well. And as you were talking about the 6 stages of growth, and you mentioned that in terms of sweet spot, the example that you gave today is your podcast, right? Mm-hmm. You feel that you're in your sweet spot as a podcast host. As far as the 2 stages that are under the sweet spot, which would be the accelerator and metamorph, yep, which stage are you in terms of your podcast?
I would say that I am in right between accelerator and metamorph. So um yeah, right in between, because I don't feel like I'm anywhere near approaching the point at which I'll say, okay, I've done what I came to do. I feel like I'm still in that place of optimized tension of like, okay, it's good, but what can I do to make it better? What do I need to do to continue to improve it? So there's a cycle going on right in the middle of that sweet spot that I think for the foreseeable future, I'll stay here.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So, as we wrap up our conversation, I have got a couple other questions for you, but I would love it if you would share with all of us where we can go to connect. You gave the website. What other social channels are you on, and where can we go to consume your amazing content?
Oh, well, thank you. So like you said, the disruptionadvisors.com is the easiest place. The Disrupt Yourself podcast is an easy place. Um, you talked about the book Spark Growth. I am most active on LinkedIn and on Instagram.
Very good. Well, I do have both of those handles, so we'll make sure that we share that as well. And I do want to mention to everyone that, yes, you are a top voice on LinkedIn. You are very active. And as a matter of fact, just before we went live today, you were doing a LinkedIn Live. So for those of you who want to find out more about Whitney, about her work, about her podcast, exploring more deeply into the S curve, I would encourage you to follow Whitney on all social channels and absolutely check out some of these some of these LinkedIn lives. They are excellent.
You know
So,
what? Sorry, I just
yes,
thought of one more thing. So I have a
sure.
weekly newsletter, and I would encourage you to sign up for that if this intrigues you, because I write every week something about what I'm learning. So this process of real-time learning, and then I respond to every email. So if you hit return and say, "Hey, blah 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 blah," I will respond to you, and that's usually going to be the best place. I'm sometimes a little bit slower on responding to LinkedIn and Instagram, but on responding to the newsletter, I'm pretty quick.
Wonderful. We will definitely do that. What challenge would you like to leave our audience with?
I would like to leave you with this. I would like to leave you with an invitation and a challenge. So the invitation is to draw an S curve and think about where you are, your portfolio of curves. And also for you as an entrepreneur, you can plot where your people and your team are on the curves and how you can help them build momentum. If they're at the launch point, what support do they need in the sweet spot? What focus do they need in mastery? What kind of challenge they need? So those are the suggestions. The invitation to you is, if you, Jay, and I have done my job well, everyone listening is going to have had an idea of something that they want to do or feel like they need to do. And my encouragement to you would be to do it and to make it small enough that you could do it in just 2 minutes. So, for example, if you're thinking, I want to write a book and I'm going to spend 30 minutes a day writing a book. No, 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 no. Let me just coach you for half a second. What I would invite you to do is make a commitment that you are, over the next week, going to open up your computer and spend 1 minute writing down ideas and tell someone that you're going to do it. Because if you will do that, make it so small that you'll do it even if it's 11 o'clock at night, that 1 minute for 7 days, and you told someone that you were going to do it, then you'll actually do it. That's how you get dopamine at the launch point of the curve. That'll give you that momentum to move into the sweet spot. So whatever that thing is that you've been thinking, okay, I need to do it, make it so small that you will in fact do it.
Outstanding. So good. So here is my final question to you. What is the most difficult decision that you've had to make in the pursuit of who you've become?
Oh, that's easy. Marrying my husband. Here's
Do
why.
tell.
Mm-hmm. So I got married in college, and my mom didn't really want me to marry him. And my parents had a marriage that was somewhat fraught. And so even though he was a perfect person for me to marry, I kept pushing him away. So it was very hard to make the decision to do it. And yet, I think about everything that has been possible for me in terms of the growth that I have experienced and gone through as a person, as a mother, as a human being, as a worker, as an entrepreneur. None of that would be possible for me without the foundation of that relationship, the person that I decided to marry.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And Whitney, I greatly appreciate your candor, your willingness to explore any direction that we together decided to go on in this conversation. I appreciate your insights, you bringing this amazing book to life, and just your generosity. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've enjoyed researching you, and I very much look forward to getting to know you even better as we continue to grow together. So thank you so much. I am grateful for you.
Jay, thank you. This was really fun, really engaging. Thank you.
It is my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and we would love it if you would leave us a review and let us know what you thought about this episode. And to enjoy more episodes, all you have to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com/podcast. And until next time, keep learning and growing. Pick up a copy of Smart Growth, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.
Jay
Scherr.
Scherr, business consultant.
Jay Scherr.
Business Consulting.